Hey guys, my name is Max Bridge and today we are going to take an in-depth look into how I created this photo. In my last video, I gave you 5 tips in 5 minutes on bottle photography. If you missed that, make sure you click above and watch that first, because there are some really important things you need to take note. In this video, we're going to cover more of an in-depth lighting breakdown for how this image was created. Now we're going to start with the backlight. That's what gives us the glow inside the bottle. So let's head over there now. So this is our backlight. I'm using a Profoto D2 head. You don't have to use Profoto, of course. I started using only speed lights and Profoto is a little bit more expensive than that. I love the D2 heads. If you are thinking of getting any more expensive strobes, they have 10 stops of power range, which is just fantastic for a still life photographer. That is attached to this C-stand, which is far too large. I didn't have anything smaller, so what I did, I got a Manfrotto super clamp and just clamped to the C-stand and put the head onto that. It's a really useful thing to do if you need to get slightly lower but you haven't got a lower stand. On the front of the Profoto head, we have a Profoto 1 foot by 1 foot 3 inch softbox. It's a very small softbox, and what I've actually done is I've flagged it off even further. So I've taken this piece of foam board and I've flagged it off so you've got a very thin strip of light. You don't have to use a softbox like this. You could use a reflector piece of trace, or a reflector and a grid. The two things you have to take note of though are the shape of the modifier and then its effect on your scrim. The scrim in this case is a piece of what's called opal acrylic. I got it in the UK from a company called Trent Plastics. In America or elsewhere throughout the world, I think acrylic can also be called perspex. It's a little bit confusing. Essentially, it's just a piece of plastic. And it doesn't really affect the color of the light too much, but it just diffuses it, and it's nice having something rigid. You could use a piece of trace. I use trace all the time. I use a Lee 129, which is a heavy frost piece of trace. Again, there's lots of different variations. I know Savage Plastic is something I think people in America use quite a lot. And that's also good. So there's loads of things you can use. The important thing is the shape of the modifier, which will determine the shape of the highlight inside the bottle. This is going to give me a slightly longer highlight, which I like. And then your position to the scrim. If you were to position it, say, at the side like that, then you'd have a highlight on one side of the bottle and it'd be fading to dark toward the other side. We don't want that in this instance. In this instance, I want something relatively even. But what I'm going to do, I'm going to take a photo and I'm going to show you what happens when I move this right next to the scrim. So we've taken a photo, watch it come up. Okay, so we see there, obviously it's not positioned correctly. I'll move it a little bit over. There we go. Now you see that tiny move I made? That was like less than an inch. You really have to be precise with the positioning of your lights and this sort of thing, especially when you're using quite a small set like I am here. Now you can see the edges of that highlight are really, really sharp. Now that's because I've pushed this up against the scrim, it's almost as though the scrim wasn't there. There is no softening being done. That's like I've got a bare softbox just reflecting into the bottle. Watch what happens though as I move it away. So I'll move it away just a little bit. That's what, 2 centimeters? Now look at the edges of the highlight in that bottle. You see how it got a little bit softer? Now I'll move it a little bit further away. So now we're about 5 centimeters away from the scrim, and watch the edges on that bottle. You see how it's just getting that little bit softer, the edges of the highlight. One more time. Yeah, there we go. I like that. That looks good. That's about 6-7 inches away from the scrim, and you can see what's happened. The reason we have a soft light there is when it was close here, the fall off on this scrim was really hard. As I moved it further away, you get a hot spot in the middle and then it falls off gradually to the edge. That's why we get that nice glow with that nice feathered edge. All right, now we're going to move to the front of the set and I'm going to show you how it's built, because I really love this set. It's a really simple one. And then we're going to cover the other lights. All right, let's go. So now we're at the front of the set, let me break down how I build this up and then we'll cover light by light and get the whole bottle lit perfectly. So here we go. So the back scrim here, the one I was telling you about for the backlight, that is held up on a C-stand, which has an extension arm going over the front of it. The extension arm is then clamped to the acrylic with these two Manfrotto super clamps. From the super clamps, we have two magic arms. Magic arms are really versatile things to have in a studio. If you don't have them already, then I really suggest getting them. They're strong enough to hold a light. I can clamp that to pretty much any surface, so long as I'm not concerned about damaging it. And I can put my Profoto D2s on there and then put it wherever I want, and it's heavy enough to hold them, even with a modifier on the front. Obviously, if you're using a very heavy modifier, then that's probably not going to work. But the one I showed you at the backlight, that little softbox, that works perfectly with these. So what we do is I introduce another piece of acrylic. Make sure it's touching that back piece, otherwise you're going to get a slightly dodgy reflection at the back of the bottle. You could fill that reflection, say with a piece of black card or something, but in this instance I don't want that. So then with this here, again, it's just like the backlight. It's about the light you use, the modifier you have on the front of it, and its positioning to the scrim. So if I turn this light on now, we'll see the modeling light come on, and the modifier I have on here is a strip box. It's roughly, I think, 9 inches by about 3 feet long, and the reason it's so long is because I want it reflecting up and down the whole of that bottle. And what I have it placed at an angle to this scrim, so it's creating kind of a V shape. The reason for doing so is I want a highlight on one edge and a soft feathering of the light down the scrim, which will then be reflected in the bottle. So I'll take a photo and we'll see it come up and capture one now. There you go. So you see that highlight, which was just added to the side of the bottle. I'll quickly toggle between the two. So this is the backlight only, and then that's with the next light added. You see we have this nice soft highlight here, which I really like. Okay, so now we'll move to the next light. Again, we're getting another piece of acrylic here. This is why I really love this, this lighting setup. Obviously, you can probably see I'm working in a pretty small room here. So having lots and lots of stands around can be quite annoying. And to be honest, even if you're working in a big studio, I hate having loads of stands surrounding my set. It's just asking for trouble. You're just waiting to trip on something. So by having these magic arms instead of C-stands, I love it. I think it's great. So let's get this next light on. Turn that one on. Okay, so I'm just going to try and mirror the positioning roughly. Get the model. There we go. And we will take a capture and see what that gives us. Let me have a look at that. So I can see immediately the power seems to be a lot stronger on that side. So we'll take it down a little bit. This is the Profoto Air Remote trigger. So what that allows me to do is I can change the power of the lights from there, which I think is great. Sometimes you don't actually want to touch your camera when you're doing still life if you don't want anything to move. But in this instance, I'm not too concerned because we're going to get most of the shot in one take. So yeah, I can adjust the power from here, which is great. So I took it down by 1/3 of a stop, and that looks pretty good. That looks pretty even. So I like that. We've got both of our lights set up, mirroring the highlight on either side of the bottle. Now we're going to introduce our final light, and this one I think is really interesting. What we're doing with this light is we're using a technique called cross polarization. If you've not heard of it before, then you're going to be really amazed by this right now. So let me turn this on. This light is actually a slightly cheaper light. This is a Lancata 300 SF. I think it's very similar to a Godox QT 300. I think that's the name of the light. It's not the greatest of light. It's not terrible. It's pretty cheap. It's got a relatively fast flash duration. My biggest complaint with it though is that the power consistency is terrible for the first, from setting 5 to 6, which is a large part of the power range on this light. And also during that setting, you go up the power quite drastically. But it's not a terrible light, it's not bad. Godox also have the second version of this light, which is out. Again, that's not bad, but anyway, this is not a review of this light. So let me just get this on. The idea of this is to highlight the label. If you notice from the photo, I'll get it up on Capture One again now. Our label is quite dark. So we started here. This was just the background light. Then we introduced our side light, and then we introduced our second light. But the label is still pretty dark. If I introduce this light to try and brighten that label, and I take a photo now, what you'll see is there is a horrible highlight on the front of that bottle. It's really ugly and really nasty. Now what cross polarization can do is I can actually get rid of that highlight. I've got a polarizer on my lens, and this is a polarizing gel which I'm going to put on my light. When I rotate the gel on my light, what you'll see is you'll see that highlight disappear. I'm going to go into live view quickly. There we go, so we're in live view. I pop the gel onto my light and rotate it. And as I rotate it, there we go. You see how that highlight disappeared? I'll just do it again for you. There it is, and it's gone. Now that is a pretty amazing technique, in my opinion. Right, we will go out of live view, take another photo, and just check that highlight has gone. Yeah, perfect. Let's compare the two. Highlight there, highlight gone. Then we have dark bottle and lighter bottle. Well, let me just increase the power of this. One final photo. And there we go. That's it. Dark bottle, dark label rather, light label. Perfect. This is the final image that we ended up with today. I'm just going to go over in Capture One over to the folders section, and these are the images that I created prior to creating the video. This is actually the final edited version. The only thing that I did, which I didn't do on set when I was making the video, is that I color corrected this a little bit. I used a grey card just to stop it being, I think it was quite blue, just make it a little bit more accurate. And I also focus stacked it, and that's really important. That's something that I do with all of my images. So as you can see here, there is actually 9 images that I took. And essentially focus stacking, all you do is you grab hold of your lens, get the focus ring, and you go to the closest point or the farthest point, whichever you want to start at, and then you turn the ring as you take photos until you've covered the whole length of the product you're photographing. You then use a program to stack those images together. You can use Photoshop. I use a program called Helicon Focus. I find it really good. It's very quick for doing it. You can also do that straight from Capture One. So if you select all of your images, right click, and then go edit with, you can then select Helicon Focus there, export it there, and it'll appear straight back in Capture One, which I think is really, really useful. So anyway, once I've got my images focus stacked, it appears back in Capture One, and let's just open this. This is my final edited PSD, TIFF actually, and we'll just take you through it. So here we are in Photoshop. I'll just turn everything off, and we'll start from the beginning. You go away. All right. So here we go. It was a pretty quick edit, really. This was our raw image. As you can notice, I photographed it relatively wide. Reason being, I photographed this with a Nikon D810. That's got a 36 megapixel sensor, so there is tons of detail. If I go back into Capture One and just quickly get the crop tool up, if I cropped into the edges of this bottle, and we're going to keep a bit of the reflection, so let's say about there, I've still got 5,500 pixels. I could print a gigantic image from that. There is absolutely no need, in this instance anyway, for me to fill the frame. The intention for this image would be to go on somebody's website. It's not going to be a billboard, it's not going to be printed huge, so for a website, 5,500 pixels on the long edge is more than enough. So there's no need to fill your frame and then have to do a focus stack which is that much bigger. It just makes the whole process a little bit easier. So anyway, we started here, and then it's just cleaning. First thing I would have done is create the mask, and to do so it would have been a pretty easy case in this instance of just going select, color range, and just selecting. So you just click, use a little eyedropper here, click once and then click a few more times until you can get the edges selected. You click OK, and then you'd start making your mask from there and then delete these black cards out. And then you end up with something that looks like that. Really easy to do, pretty quick, just takes a couple seconds. After that, I then started cleaning. Now the bottle, if you watched that other video I talked about, you know that the bottle would have been prepared before this shoot. So there wasn't actually too much for me to do in terms of cleaning. I'd done quite a lot already. Now you can see there was quite a bit of dirt on the table. My fault. I should have sprayed that off beforehand, but it was a quick fix just using a dust and scratches layer. So there we go, took that off. And then even now, if you look over the bottle, there's barely anything that needs to be removed. I don't like these little dimples and little bits up here. That's all I did with the frequency separation. Took away those, cleaned up other little areas, and that was it. You know, the intention for this image is, like I said, it's not to be a billboard image, it's just to go on somebody's website. So you should not, and I really should stress this, you should not spend hours and hours and hours editing this. This should just be a quick edit. Okay, and then I used a little bit of spot healing as well. What I do actually is I have a little action called my cleaning group. When I click that, it creates all of these layers. So I might not even have used that, but it just was created with the group. Finally, I was a bit lazy and I grouped those layers into a smart object. So what I would have done is selected all of them, right clicked, and then clicked convert to smart object. Now what that does is it groups all the layers into a smart object. I'm not going to go into detail with it now because this video will then get really long, and I've actually talked about this before. If you go onto my YouTube channel, I'll link it up above in the video here. There's a video called The Amazing Power of Linked Layers in Photoshop. And that is a little bit different to this. It's a better way of doing it actually, but because I knew this wasn't going to be a really in-depth edit with tons and tons of layers, I did it in a slightly lazier way, where I just created a smart object by selecting those layers like I showed you a moment ago. The reason that isn't the best way of doing it is I find that smart objects really slow down Photoshop. If you have quite a few of them, it can actually become a massive problem. So it's much better to do the method I referred to in that other video. But like I said, I'm not going to get into it now, otherwise we'll be here for ages. So having created that group, it's then the next corrections which I always make, contrast corrections and color corrections. I'll just go into them in a little bit more detail. So we have a little general adjustment, just very basic, doesn't really do much. It's just a little curve, which you can see up there. And then we have a couple targeted adjustments. There is one here, which is just for the bottom of, oh no, sorry, that's for the label. So that's just highlighting the middle part of the label here. And then there should be one, yeah, just there for the bottom. I wanted the bottom to kind of brighten up a little bit. So I've done that there. Actually, looking at it now, I don't like how it is spinning onto the bottom of the reflection there. So let's just change that. Ooh. So I just hit B for the brush tool. I'm going to zoom out a tiny bit. Hit the backslash key just so I can see my mask. I've got black selected. Make sure I'm on the right brush, not the history brush. Take my flow down to about 10 by hitting Shift and 1. I'm just going to paint that away a bit because I don't want it on the bottom. Hit backslash again just to turn that off. There we go. So you can see that's just highlighting the bottom part of the bottle there, which I thought was a little bit too dark. After the contrast adjustments, we have some color adjustments. There wasn't much to do, but I just wanted to color match the label here because it was quite different to how it should be, and I wanted to change the bottom of the bottle for being that red to a bit more of a yellowy kind of color to match the top. And that was it. That was the whole edit. Now, this part is kind of interesting. If you wanted to take this from a white background to a black background, you can do that. I'm not going to get into it now, but very quickly, there we go. It's not hard. You create the black background here, and then it's just a case of adjusting the edges. You see the edges here? That's without any adjustment made, and this is with a slight adjustment made. Just feathering a black edge onto there to make it sit nicely on a black background. All right, that's it for today on bottle photography. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Make sure you watch that other one I've mentioned. It really helps kind of round out this whole tutorial. Preparing the bottle is a huge step, and so are other things that I mentioned in that video, so make sure you catch that one. If you liked today's one, please hit the like button, and if you want to see more from me, click subscribe. All right, thanks guys, I'll see you next time.